Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Yeah, hopefully everybody can hear me okay. We are going to do a show tonight all around supply teaching and in particular what it is like today in the year 2024. And we're going to explore what it's actually like. Not just sort of like, secondhand accounts. We've got two actual supply teachers here who've done it recently, who are doing it at the moment. And that is Beth and Stuart, who'll be on later. Beth, we'll just check you can hear us okay. Can you hear us all right?
Hello, yeah, I can hear you. Hiya.
Fantastic. Good evening. So in a minute, Beth, I'm going to ask you some questions, obviously, about your experiences. But just before we do that, a quick shout out to our sponsor tonight, which is John Catt Educational. You can see there, if you're listening to this live, you can see their pinned tweet. But if you're listening back as a podcast, then definitely check out John Catt and all the educational books they have available at johncattbookshop.com. You can use the code JCTTR2324 to get 20% off any item at johncattbookshop.com. So, Beth, just to kick off, you did a thread on this very network last week, I think it was.
Yeah.
Tell us about that thread.
Yeah, so I've been doing supply work since September, having been a teacher, full-time teacher for 5 years, and the kind of a series of experiences that I've had since September, and kind of I selected the ones that I think people would be most interested in, but also ones that were kind of quite plainly quite shocking. So things like, kind of my day-to-day life, my day-to-day work, I would be very regularly sworn at by kids that kind of the default would be I would turn up at the door and the kids would go kind of like, oh yes, we've got a supply teacher. So the default is you're not working, and so therefore if you kind of expect them to work or have any sort of expectation around what they're doing that lesson, they struggle to cope and kind of rebel, and that kind of ranges from low level disruption, talking over me, swearing at me. I've been kind of bombarded in a classroom once, wasn't allowed to leave because a girl called me kind of the B word and I'd given her a detention, and then she got all her friends to come at the end of the day and kind of trap me in my classroom. I had a chair pulled out from under me, shoes thrown at me. So I thought, the world needs to hear.
When you say trapped you in the classroom, what do you mean by that? You mean they all turned up and whatever at your room?
Yeah. So maybe kind of 10 of them, and kind of stood by the door and wouldn't let me leave at the end of the day because I'd given a girl a detention.
Oh my God. And how did that get resolved?
Kind of eventually, after I kind of didn't give in, they sort of let me out, and SRT came and they sort of sorted it out a bit. To be fair, that was probably a school that dealt with things a bit better, but other schools don't, I would say. Sort of if I kind of say this person needs a detention or whatever, I know for a fact that very often actually that's just sort of forgotten because it's a supply lesson, so it doesn't really matter.
So just going back there, so you started supply teaching in September. How many different schools have you been in since September to now?
So I've been in 15 schools around East London and South London mainly.
Wow. Okay. And how long in each of those 15 have you spent? Are some just a day?
Yeah.
Or are some longer
than
that?
Some would be a day. I think one school I was in maybe on and off for kind of a few weeks. But that kind of time frame.
Yeah. And in terms of the time, so I mean, thinking about those 15 schools as a collective and the experience you had there, what would you say was the best experience you had within those 15?
Yeah.
And what would you say was the worst experience? Maybe you've already mentioned it. And, tell me a bit about that, your best and worst experiences.
Yeah, good question. Start with the positives. Best experiences. Gosh, I think it's probably when you kind of get a class that's not, not too bad. You know that you can sort of get them to not talk and get on with their work, and then maybe it's a class that I teach religion and English, and so it's a class that I can kind of actually help and teach them. There's one school that jumps to mind that actually wasn't so bad for some of the classes, but others maybe not so great. So yeah, that was nice, but that was really rare. I'd say I wouldn't kind of go into a school expecting that to be the case at all. And then in terms of the worst experience, probably the school I went to where I was bombarded in the classroom. I'd say that was unideal.
Yeah. And like, what drove you to write that thread last week on Twitter? Was that something that had happened recently to drive you to write that, or was that just I've decided I'm going to write this now? Was there anything that like triggered you
um,
to sort of say all that?
Yeah, good question. I think it's more cumulative, and I think I'm coming to the end of doing supply, and I'm starting a full-time job again. And I was sort of just looking back and reflecting, and thought I'd put it together and tell the world.
I mean, it's quite unique to have worked to have taught in 15 schools since
Yeah.
September. In the sense, I'm sure a lot of supply teachers do that sort of thing, but it is unique. I mean, I've done supply before, but I've never done that volume of schools.
Yeah.
I've only ever done a couple of schools, really, maybe two, maybe three,
Yeah.
maybe a few more actually. If I go, thinking back, maybe a few more, but I certainly haven't done many. So what? That's a sort of unique insight in a way.
Mm.
As a teacher, it's different if you're visiting schools, but you've actually done it as a teacher. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, what are the things you've learned from those 15 schools? You said you're going back into full time.
Yeah.
Great. What's your subject, by the way? I didn't ask what your subject is.
RE mainly, and
Okay.
English as well.
Okay. I mean, what sort of is the common? What are the experiences that you've taken from
Mm.
this so far?
Well, one thing that has really stood out actually is the schools that are better and kind of more on behaviour are the schools that SLT is really out in force, and you can see it. And there have been schools where I would kind of give it attention or need to remove a pupil, and SLT would just back you, and kind of the pupils knew that, and so they would respond to that. And then that's in huge contrast to schools where I was at one school in East London where the my head of department said, oh, if you're giving it attention or anything like that, just make sure SLT don't know, which is kind of a pretty dysfunctional sort of way to be for a school. And obviously that means SRT don't know what's going on. Maybe that's just seems like a really odd culture, and then that's massively reflected in the behavior culture. And that school in East London, I think, outside my classroom, I was there for 1 week. Outside my classroom, I broke up 4 fights, and that's right at kind of intervened in 4 fights, and that was right outside
Bloody
my
hell.
classroom, let alone the whole school. And SLT wasn't present at all. So I'd say that's a huge thing I've taken away from it.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a supply, because when I did supply, it is whatever anyone says, and the thing is that before I did supply, I you have these sort of ideas that you can achieve what you can achieve as a normal permanent teacher, as a supply teacher. I had this
Yeah.
ideal sort of thing of, no, I'm good enough that I can do what I do as a normal teacher as a supply teacher to a degree.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is really, the honest thing is that, and I don't really, everyone will have their different opinion on this, particularly people who've never done supply, right? But it was a little bit like, for me, going back to my training year, in
Yeah.
the sense of when I was a student teacher, I remember feeling a little bit powerless in
Yeah.
certain situations. Particularly, I remember as a student teacher, it was a little bit like my mentor, she would open the door, walk in for a minute, they go silent. She'd close the door, and it was back to not
Yeah.
necessarily outlandish madness, but it was sort of, there was a rumble of thunder there. You know, it
Yeah.
wasn't like, it wasn't easy anymore. And you know, and to be fair, that's the reality of teaching in a way, because
Mhm.
once I was on my own, you have to build up to get that anyway, right?
Yeah.
But it was almost like my awakening to what that situation was like. And I remember at the end of my training year, we're going back to 2007, 2008 now. I was in a school in South Wales, a really tough, really tough school actually, and they offered me 3 weeks supply at
Okay.
the end of my training year, and I took it. Um, and I remember I was sworn at. There was a lot of things that happened in those 3 weeks where I was like, oh my goodness. But you know what? It did sort of help me in the sense that when I started as an NQT, as it was known back then, an ECT now, when I started, I was like, right, I need to set my stall out. This is what
Yeah.
it gave me, that awareness of what I need to do.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in that idea for you, whether did it deflate you? Did it make you rethink who you are as a professional? Did it, and also I'm interested in, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but the way you were seen by, you know,
Yeah.
I genuinely think there's a little bit of snobbery towards supply
Yeah.
teachers
100%.
in fact, you know what, I'm going to go further. I think there's a little bit of snobbery in the profession, full stop. But
Yeah.
I think that some of that snobbery is directed towards supply teachers
Yeah.
and you know what, I've probably been guilty of it in the past. When I was 25 and I'd done 2 years and I got established in my school that I was in then as
Yeah.
a young teacher, I'm not saying I'd ever be rude or anything like that, but maybe I did have that a slight bit of dismissive mindset, or sort of not respecting
Yeah.
fully, the people who are walking in. And it's very easy to fall into that, particularly as a teacher who's never done it,
Yeah.
because you're almost trained to think. I'm sorry about this, Beth. I'm going on a massive tangent here, but
Go for it.
I don't really care. Like you are trained to think that somehow the word supply teacher means that they are in some way deficient compared to you on some level.
Yeah.
There is that. I do believe there is that slight snobbery. And what was your experience? You've worked in these 15 schools. What's your experience in that sense with the other staff and everything else?
Yeah, that's a really good reflection. It's funny you say that because I've had the kind of two people who were talking amongst themselves, and then one told the other one to do something, and then they said, "Oh no, Miss will see," and then the other people in response said, "Oh, she's only a supply teacher. She's not a proper teacher," which totally encapsulates just everything that you've just said, right? No, I think yeah, there is snobbery, and people are in supply teaching for different reasons, and some people kind of see it as a long-term way that just works in their life, and then some people do it to just kind of tie them over between jobs or whatever, which is what I'm doing. But
Yes.
yeah, no, totally, they're looked down on. I would agree with that.
Yeah. And I mean, when it comes to the students themselves,
Yeah.
obviously you'd expect, because I mean, when I was in school, I remember, being 14, 15, going, yeah, we've got supply, and everyone would be like, it was almost like New Year's
Yeah.
Eve, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The lesson. And it was amazing. And I remember the sense of like, oh my God, I'm so relieved. Like if there was
Yeah.
homework
Yeah.
due, or if there was like something happening that I was dreading, and oh, we've got supply, we don't need to do it.
Yeah.
Like you're already, I suppose, starting on the back foot. I mean, how, as a supply teacher, how seriously did you take the job? If that makes sense. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
did you try, or did you just see it as, look, I'm just going to crowd control here, get out of three, that's it, end of story.
Yeah. Yeah, well, firstly, I'd say in general, kind of, I've worked in and been trained by some very good schools. I generally kind of back myself as a teacher, but you're absolutely right. Going into these situations every day totally deflates you. And I would say I'd say probably up until, and this is kind of a little bit ashamed to admit this, but up until about a week ago, I took it very seriously, and I tried to get every pupil to watch every lesson. And you know what? It just had such a massive detriment and wore me down so much. And I'd leave every day and I'd come home and moan to my partner every day. I was just miserable with it all. And then about a week ago, I thought, they don't care. They're not going to do any work. Why am I doing this to myself? Sort of thing. I took the job, I think, probably too seriously. And then I've sort of slowed down in the last week, I would say.
Yeah,
Just
I
out of
mean,
necessity, to be honest.
it would be very easy to get really upset as a supply teacher pretty quickly, in the sense that, you know, you are, if you engage in the same way you would as a full-time teacher that's established in a school, if you engage in that way, 9 times out of 10 it probably won't work out. And then you are going to be in trouble, because you're probably going to have a nightmare of a day or a week or whatever. Now that shouldn't be the case, right? That shouldn't be the case.
No.
Any teacher in the country should be able to go into a school and have a possibility, an opportunity, the potential to have a nice time and to do their job well. But unfortunately, the reality is, right or wrong, that is not, that is not the case. So, I mean, how did the students? I mean, you've mentioned some really bad incidents. Do you think that when it comes to senior leadership teams and heads of department and all that, I mean, did you feel supported in the schools you've been in? You've mentioned a little bit about feeling a bit sidelined and all the rest of it. Tell me about the differences between different schools and situations that you were in.
So I'd say the vast majority, if I kind of handed in the piece of paper with sort of the register and pupils I wanted to give it attention to or whatever, I think they often seem just kind of slightly annoyed that then they have to go through this process of giving detentions. There are, I'd say, a couple of schools I'd be backed up, and it would be, as you say, kind of SRT will walk in and then they fall silent, and then they're working for a bit and then they walk out again, etc. But I would say the vast majority, I don't feel backed up, because I think there is, as you say, kind of teacher to teacher sort of, maybe snobbery is a hard word, but just sort of like, oh well, supply teacher, it's a supply lesson, we don't expect anything to get done almost. And so there's kind of an apathy, I'd say.
Did you, obviously prior to doing this supply, you've obviously worked permanently in schools, so did it surprise you what it was to was it what you expected it to be like?
Probably yes. I think I've been very spoilt in that I've worked at kind of Michaela and West London Free School since I've been a teacher, where with behaviour they're just really, really on it. And I knew that kind of outside of that probably wasn't similar. And so I probably wasn't surprised, but then I certainly have been surprised by kind of individual instances, like having a shoe thrown at you or something like that. Like, that's a bit surprising.
So that shoe incident, did that, what I mean, tell me about that. How did that come about? What happened exactly?
Good question. How did that come about? I was just stood at the front of a class, and it was quite a small class. They were kind of the SEN class, and one of the boys at the back decided that he was going to throw a shoe at me. But because that, kind of interestingly, because they were of SEN needs, the school were very sort of like, oh, that's what they do. And so they didn't get any repercussion for that. And I would say that at all. And that was, that class would, call me all sorts of things, but because they were the SEN class, they kind of got away with it, which isn't really what SEN means. Kind of they need support in learning how to behave, just as much as they need support in kind of how they learn and things like that. But I don't think the school quite got that.
I mean, that's incredible. I mean, did the shoe hit you?
Yes, it was a good shot.
Blooming heck! In where? If you don't mind, in the face,
side of my head.
Oh my goodness!
I know, could have taken me out.
That's absolutely terrible. I mean, this is the thing, is that when you hear stories like that, you sort of think, let's imagine, let's put that in the situation of a hospital or a police
Yeah.
station or
Yeah.
any other sort of public building, and a child or anybody actually launched a shoe at someone else's
Yeah.
head. Well,
Wouldn't
that
go
and
well for them.
it hit them in the head. That would be assault. Well, that is assault, isn't it? That is
Yeah.
assault. I mean, I remember somebody telling me about an incident where somebody had thrown a bin. They'd sort
Oh
of been
gosh.
passing the room and they'd thrown a bin and it hit them. When they threw it again, nothing happened
Wow.
because of that. But in my head, I'm going, that is assault. I mean,
Yeah.
did you sort of think about it in those terms, or did you like just sort of think, well, I've just got to go along with this because it is what it is, sort of thing?
Yeah, probably the latter, to be honest, because you're in a context where it's so chaotic, and that's the most chaotic of all the things happening, but there are still a lot of other things to deal with. And then when you kind of take it to SLT or whatever, and they have a bit of a dismissive attitude, it's sort of like, well, what are you going to do? Like, it's nothing to do. That's it.
Yeah, and you also mentioned in your thread, you experience very over sexualized language from
Yeah.
very young pupils.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting you've sort of highlighted that in there. I mean, is that something that happened a lot? Is that, how did that come about?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it happened a lot, but
No.
obviously it's the sort of thing that stays with you, I suppose.
Yes.
And yeah, things that I wouldn't even kind of say on here, like it's just awful, sort of really weird, twisted things. But strangely enough, this same kind of SEN class actually, which again, when kind of I wrote down what exactly was said and passed that on to the right people, they had a very kind of like, well, like that's just them, like they're just really hard to manage, sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, goodness me. I
Which
mean, the thing is that I have experienced, not as bad as that, but I have experienced, some of the things you put in your list of things, like the name
yeah,
calling, the stuff like that. Not
yeah,
not regularly, but I've experienced it,
yeah,
and certainly the low level stuff,
yeah.
100%. And I have also experienced that sort of. um I wrote a blog ages ago about it was something, I can't remember the title of it. It was something like why teachers can't teach or something like that. I can't
Yeah.
remember, but it got a lot of sort of lots of people commented on it at the time. And one of the bits in there was that I walked out of the classroom once in this particular school, and to be fair, I was there longer than I was there semi long term in this school, and the office doors were closed, and it was like, I need, there wasn't just me. There was like 5 or 6 teachers on this corridor. The others were all permanent. I was sort of semi-supply there. The others were all permanent members of staff.
Yeah.
It was just carnage all over the place,
Mm.
and the office doors were closed. I mean, how accessible were SLT and heads of department and all that when you were there? I mean, did you feel like you could sort of like reach out and get help if you needed it?
Um, I would say there's one school that jumps to mind where I did feel like SRT were kind of there, and I was given kind of login details so I could email who I needed. But
Yeah,
as a supply staff, you're in general, you're not given login details. You're not given a
no,
way to kind of communicate outside the classroom. One system a school had was kind of send a good pupil to reception to get someone to come and help.
yeah,
But if you're literally with a class
yeah,
of kind of pupils that are absolutely not doing what you say and are like running riot, who do you send? And I would send someone, and then they'll be like, yeah, I told reception, and then kind of it turned out they didn't, because like that's obviously not a good system. So yeah, obviously the schools like that, you don't feel at all connected or backed up. In general, you wouldn't even know. Well, I would say kind of half the schools you wouldn't particularly know who the head teacher or the or SLT were. They didn't kind of make themselves known to you, which big schools, they're busy people, fair
yeah.
enough. But a way of contacting kind of someone is useful, and weirdly I don't actually get that very often.
Yeah, of course. From your experience in all of these schools, what what do you think? Just talking in terms of the other teachers that you met along the way,
Yeah.
Because this is, since September, so it's this academic year. What would you say morale is like across the teaching profession? What was it like in the staff rooms? What were the
Yeah.
teachers saying? What was going on there?
That's really interesting. I would say, well, I've got a theory as to why, but I think you're right, morale, well, I'm not saying you said this, but kind of in general, morale didn't seem at its all-time highest. I'd say there'd be kind of lots of moaning about
Well, that's
SLT.
always existed, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. Moaning about behaviour, but then in schools that didn't have, like, it was fair to moan about behaviour because they were
Yeah,
in schools that didn't have the systems.
yeah,
I think kind of in general post COVID, I think teachers tend to see that as a huge reason for why behaviour is so kind of abominable. I'm sure it always has been, but I've spoken to a few teachers that say that it seems even more so since COVID, and that's kind of got morale down.
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Michaela. I interviewed Catherine Burbelsing
Oh
last
yeah.
week. If anyone watched
Oh,
that, but the in Michaela, they're very well known for their sort of behaviour policies and the way they go about things. I mean, tell us a little bit about that when it came to sort of behaviour there, and your role as a teacher there, if you can.
yeah. Well, I think the thing that stood out about Michaela, which was wonderful, was the fact that you're a teacher and you can do your job. Like, you can just teach, and that's amazing. And that's because SLT and heads of year take on that kind of huge responsibility, but a necessary one, of as soon as a pupil kind of shows any sign of kind of not cooperating and not being a part of the lesson, or defying you, then there are sanctions for that. And what that led to was an environment in which, yeah, as I say, you can teach, and you're therefore morale is up kind of in general in
Yeah.
staff, because they're not having to deal with kind of awful behavior, and pupils find it kind of really engaging as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In a moment, we'll bring Stuart in, but I've got a couple more questions for you, Beth,
Yeah.
just before you sort of head off. So, from this point on, if you were to start your experience of supply teaching again,
Mm.
is there anything that would be a red flag for you when you first entered a school where you would think, I'm walking out of here right now, whereas in the past you wouldn't have?
Yeah, good question. I think a telltale sign for kind of a litmus test for a school is probably corridors and general vibe of the corridors. So
Yes.
if you're in a corridor and you're kind of scared that you're literally going to be kind of toppled over, probably not a good sign, but that's all too common. But if you're kind of in a generally kind of peaceful corridor, like sort of very often schools will kind of, all the pupils meet in sort of the yard and line up, and then teachers will line them up and take them to their classroom, and it's all like relatively ordered. That's a good sign. But yeah, I think corridors are probably quite a good litmus test.
No, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think corridors and sort of just general. Yeah, if you feel comfortable, if you don't have to look over your shoulder, if you don't
Yeah,
feel that the next moment something bad's going to happen, and you're not
yeah,
thinking something bad's probably going to happen today or
yeah,
this morning or this afternoon, that's normally a pretty good sign.
yeah,
Um, Also, I mean, I wanted to ask you as well about the age, because presumably you're probably with an agency. Don't tell me the name of it, but you're probably with an agency
yeah,
to do your supply work. So, how have you found working through an agency? Has anything there sort of annoyed you? In terms of, or made you happy? Maybe. I mean,
yeah.
some agencies out there. In fact, I've got a show coming up in a couple of weeks about supply agencies, looking
Okay.
at the facts and the myths.
Yeah,
Things that are. I mean, what's been your experience and if you can go into the pay side as well, great. Obviously, you might not
yeah.
want to, but it'd be interesting to hear on that side of things how that panned out.
Yeah, well, I mean, without meaning to sound constantly quite negative, I've been through a couple of supply agencies, and that's because, and this is what I would kind of, so anyone looking to do supply, this is what I would sort of warn them about in terms of agencies, is they very often try to kind of shoehorn you into positions that you maybe not want. So, for example, what this looked like for me was, I very much wanted sort of day-to-day cover, and kind of I asked for a daily rate. I'm in London, so 170. And
Yes.
day-to-day cover, that's what I wanted, within an hour of where I live. So like
Yes.
London, pretty reasonable. And the first agency I was with constantly kind of bombarded me with, this is a great school, they want like full-time supply, is an and then I'd look it up and it'd be an hour and 20 minutes away, and I'd say kind of, oh, it's an hour and 20 minutes away, and I just want day to day, I don't want long term. And then literally 5 minutes later they'll send another one being like, oh, to go to this one, if they want long-term supply, and I'd look it up and it'd be, an hour and 15 minutes away, because I don't know, they were just not particularly kind of in tune with what I wanted, this agency in particular.
Yeah.
And I got quite sort of kind of gently but kind of frustrated, and kept having to remind them of what I'm asking for, and then they sort of got frustrated back at me, which didn't feel quite fair. But then I did find an agency that did just kind of do what I asked for, and I got my rate within an hour, and that was in East London. I actually moved over to the other side of London, and so I had to find another one, which I was sad about. But my advice generally for people looking for agencies is to maybe ask if there are good agencies that teachers can provide, because there are definitely not good ones out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, you read a lot about experiences. I read actually on your thread, I think it was on your thread, someone had said something like, I say, I saw someone say, just say I'm on 250 a day, and
Okay.
that's it, sort of thing. It's like my rate is £250.
Yeah.
I do think that there is an issue there potentially with supply agencies taking advantage, if you like, of the situation. I think, I tweeted ages ago that there should be a cap on what supply agencies can make, but then equally, it is a free market, and
Yeah.
also that would then excuse some of the practices in the profession that are going on. It would almost say, well, it's sort of, yeah, I don't know if that's the answer really, because business is business,
Yeah.
but there is for me, it is frustrating how much money there is that's being taken out of schools and away from people like you, the supply
Yeah.
teachers,
Yeah.
and going to this middle person. Did you ever think of setting yourself up on your own? I mean, some people have tried to do that. I believe it's very difficult. I've never done it.
Yeah, no, I did. When I moved over to the other West London, Southwest London, I kind of sent emails to local schools, but didn't actually hear back. Kind of chased up on the phone again as well, but didn't hear back. So, I mean, obviously, agencies provide a lot of opportunity, don't they? Because they're the ones
Yes,
with the contacts.
definitely.
And maybe schools are maybe a bit wary of just taking on individual teachers that they don't know. So yeah, there's a benefit to them, obviously.
And like you say, there will be some agencies that are good, like the
Yeah,
one that you work for, and
yeah,
will genuinely try to help you,
yeah,
and won't bombard you, and will stick to what you want, and,
yeah,
and etc. I think some agencies are probably desperate because they don't have enough teachers, so they're
yeah,
just literally scattergun in terms of, we don't really care what people have said, we're just going to bombard them anyway and
yeah.
try and get someone.
I
I
wonder
mean,
about kind of
yeah, go on.
commission as well. Like, if they get me into a role, even if I
Oh yeah,
don't really want it, they must get kind of,
oh yeah.
like, it's very
They
much
get
in their interest, isn't it?
No, 100%. They get a sort of a finder's fee if your role ever became part time or permanent.
Right. Okay.
Basically, if you take a contract on from supply, they would get a fee from the school, at that a one-off fee,
Yeah.
when that happened. Um, when you make
Interesting.
the
Okay.
transition from
Yeah.
agency to school, to
Okay.
contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, again, you know, like I say, this is why it can be quite lucrative for businesses doing this,
Yeah. It
because
can.
there's a lot of money to be made. I think the issue is that, I mean, this is the other thing, is teacher supply. You must have come across a lot of other supply teachers, I would imagine, on your
Yeah.
travels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because from what I've read, schools must be flooded with temporary and supply teachers at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think they are. They are, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say? Just a final question, Beth. What would your what would you want to change about the way things are set up, right, to make things better for supply teachers? Because there's a lot of supply teachers. There's hundreds of thousands of them.
Yeah.
How should, not hundreds of thousands, that's an exaggeration. That'd be like an army of supply teachers. But there are thousands of them, not hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
So how would you change things for them to make it better?
Oh, that's such a tricky question.
Yeah.
Well, I think kind of one of the main things as well that I've learned through supply teaching is just how important relationships and relationship building is. And that's why kind of one off you turn up and they don't know you, that you're not gonna have that respect. And like we may want pupils to kind of learn to just respect authority that's trying to help them, but actually in reality that's not necessarily the case. And so I suppose kind of maybe trying to get the same supply teachers to go to the same schools each day. Maybe I don't know how that would work logistically, but
Yeah.
On a more kind of doing the same job but just being sent to the same school, I would be very often kind of be sent to a few schools a week, and I'm not going to be able to build relationships. But I have also experienced kind of going to a school on and off for a while, and actually they do get used to your face, and you go into a lesson and they kind of know that you mean business a bit.
Yeah.
And maybe the second, third, fourth lesson you actually have them, they are a little bit calmer, which you don't get on the first lesson at all. And so yeah, I don't know, but maybe just a way of ensuring that the same teachers go to the same schools. But I suppose that's an agency based thing.
And how did you, like, you've mentioned the really bad experience you had, like, out of interest, how did you emotionally go again after those? Like, did you manage to detach from that? Like,
Yeah.
how did you do that? Because that is tough. That is
I think you've said it. You do have to just emotionally detach. You always have to kind of find it, like the whole sort of, if you don't, you have to laugh or you'll cry sort of thing, because it's so just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe human beings are saying these things to me and doing these things to me. You have to detach totally. And then, I suppose then they become like really strange anecdotes you tell someone on a teacher radio station about.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, Beth, amazing stuff. I've got Stuart coming on in a minute. Just before I do that, big shout out to everyone listening live. Matt Netty, good evening to you. I love his profile picture on Twitter. It always fills me with sort of laughter. It's great. Clive's here. We've got Anna, Lauren, Helen, Rachel, ICE, one of our regular listeners, Alex, Joe, Jessica, and Weston. So good evening to everybody. And also we've got some other listeners who are off X who have also been listening. We've got 7, in fact. So hello, 7 listeners who are not listening to this on X. Good, good on you for staying true to not being on X, if that's what you want to do. We've got Stuart coming on just in a moment. Before I introduce Stuart, a massive thank you, Beth, for coming on. Feel free to stick around. I know I think you've got to go. So really
No
good
worries,
to chat.
thank you.
Yeah, no, really good to chat to you. Massive shout out to John Catt, who are our sponsors on the show tonight. If you are looking for your next professional development book or resource, visit johncattbookshop.com. Enter the coupon code JCTTR2324. That's JCTTR2324, and you will get 20% off any book that you order on the John Catt website, johncattbookshop.com. Do that now. Go on, do it. Get you 20% discount. Now, Stuart, let's see if Stuart can hear us. Stuart, do you want to unmute yourself? There you go.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, brilliant.
How are you this evening?
I'm all right. Yeah, I've been listening into Beth's experiences, and been quite interesting.
Yeah, my next question is, can you introduce yourself, please, in terms of what you are currently doing in your role?
Okay, my name's Stuart. I've been a supply teacher. Well, it's like my 3rd stint of being a supply teacher. So I've worked from 2005. I was a supply teacher for about a year and a half, and then I had a long-term supply from 2015, and then I just started again in January, last January, supply teaching again.
And you're primary supply, right?
I'm primary, yeah. I have done some secondary, but I really didn't get on with it.
Yeah. So tell me then. You've done 3 stints of supply. The most recent one is now, is it? Pretty much.
Yeah.
And how many schools have you done in this stint of supply so far? Is it just one school, or is it?
At the moment, I'm just in the one school. I'm actually in an alternative provision school at the moment.
Yeah.
But other than that, I've worked in all around Cornwall really, and a couple in Plymouth.
Okay. And
Loads of different schools.
those stints of supply, have they all happened fairly recently, or are they spread out over many years?
Spread out over many years. So I've had like some quite long-term positions, and yeah, just supply between them, and I'm back on supply now.
Okay, cool. So tell me then, your best and worst supply experiences.
Oh, my worst supply experience was my first ever day on supply.
Oh no,
Yeah.
that's not good.
I know. I turned up at a school. I was introduced into the classroom in a TA, and I was told that this TA is working with this particular boy because he has some behavioural difficulties. And I thought, oh right, yeah, that's fine. And then about 10 minutes before the day starts, they moved the TA. She was put into a different class. And then about halfway through the morning, this boy decided he was going to jump out of the window and on the first floor and run along the roof just outside. And I was
Oh my god.
just thought, I'll pick the most sensible child. Could you just go and tell the head teacher that so and so is running across the roof?
No way. Oh no. And then go on. Then what happened next?
Oh, they brought him back down, and I didn't see him again the rest of the day. But I've not gone back to that school. That was a red flag.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Oh my goodness. What? Okay, best experience on supply.
Oh, I've had some really nice ones. I mean, I'm more comfortable in Key Stage 2, but most of my supply work recently has been in Key Stage 1 and some reception, so EYFS teaching and a little bit of nursery. I really loved just spending 3 weeks in with a EYFS class. They were just lovely.
Yeah, yeah.
Completely out of my comfort zone, but just really enjoyed doing it.
Do you feel that behaviour over the years, have you seen any changes? Have you seen any changes since COVID? Have you seen any changes in general? In terms of, you're encountering lots of different schools, lots of different behaviours. How have you found that?
I went back to a school. So I was at a school for about 8 years, and then I went back to one on supply just last year. And the TA I used to work with said, "What do you think of the behaviour? Has it got better?" And I said, "No, it's worse. This is the worst I've ever seen this behaviour." But then on the other side, I've seen absolutely fantastic behaviour. I suppose it just depends on the school and the ethos within it.
I mean, is it the typical like low level disruption type behaviours that you're seeing more of, or is it just general? When you say behaviours bad as a supply teacher, what does that mean? What
Well,
have
it's just
your experiences been?
I suppose you get children being really quite bolshy, so they're trying to assert themselves within the class. And there's been a lot more of that I found in this stint of supply than I did in previous supplies.
Yeah, right. So more sort of like confidence, I guess, in a way. I suppose.
Yeah, but
Some,
in a negative
yes,
confidence kind of way.
yes, yeah, yeah. No, I understand. And I asked these questions to Beth, but I'll ask you as well. Is how do you feel other staff and children respond to the phrase supply teacher?
Well, I think it's a bit different in primary because
Yeah.
the schools are generally smaller than a secondary school.
Yes.
So there's more of like a community within that school, and everyone kind of knows each other and kind of gets on. So you've got there's more of a support network within the school.
Yes.
I could be shown around by the head teacher when I come in, or I could be shown around by the receptionist. It completely depends on the school, but you're shown around the school, you're shown around, introduced to different members of staff. You've got some schools that are quite free with their coffee, and some that have got their own coffee.
Yeah. I mean, what? How have you found staff rooms? I mean, when you walk in as a supply teacher, is it a bit sort of like this is our sort of place, and you're go away sort of thing, or has it been very friendly?
Well, that school I went to on my first ever day, I went to go and sit in the staff room at lunchtime, and every teacher had their own coffee, they had their own mug, they had their own named milk, and they had their own chair. So I was just stood in the corner, and then thought after 10 minutes, oh, just go back to the classroom. But
Oh my goodness, this sounds terrible.
I
Did it
know,
not
yeah.
put you off supply?
It very, very nearly did, yeah. But in the end, I just needed the money in the end. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, go on.
yeah, but yeah, generally I find the staff rooms quite welcoming places with especially in the smaller primaries when I go in. People are
Yeah.
interested in what you do and where you're from and how you're finding the class. They'll talk to you about the different children in there.
What do you think's the most helpful thing to you as a supply teacher going into a school that an SLT team or other staff or whatever can put in place for you as a supply teacher? What are the best things they can do for you?
Giving you a clear understanding of the behaviour policy in the school. And where you can go with that, because I think the problem with being a day-to-day supply is you can try and follow a behaviour policy or what you would normally do in your normal class, but you can't follow it up because you're not in the next day. So you can take away, you can say, oh, you've got to stay in for a bit of break time, you've got to stay in for a bit of lunchtime. But you get to the afternoon and you've got nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's, yeah, I think it's just giving that those ways of following up on things.
Yeah, Helen's just come. I want to ask you actually, Stuart, about money in a minute. You don't have to answer it or anything, but you don't want to. But Helen's posted in saying, "I've been at the same school for a year and a half on supply. Apparently, it is cheaper to keep me on supply than pay the finder's fee to put me on a contract, which seems ridiculous." I don't know if you heard me talking to Beth about her sort of experiences with agencies and fees and all that sort of, tell me what's your experience been on that side of things with pay?
So when I started, it was probably about £100 a day, or I think 90 I was getting when I was working in 2004, 2005. Now, I've got one agency at the moment that's like 110 for a day. Another one's 140, and the third one that I'm signed up with it kind of changes from anywhere between 120 and 150.
Yeah, and that's for general cover, right?
Yeah, that's general cover.
Yeah. I mean, from what I've read, it seems like the going rate is anywhere between 110 and 150. That seems to be what the going rate is outside of London. Beth was on talking about 170 there, but obviously she's in London, so it will be slightly different. But yeah, I mean, do you think? I mean, the problem we've got is this cycle of teachers being off, not just from getting ill, from stress, long-term sickness, and just the rigor of the job, like how it is. It causes that absence, and probably more so than ever. And then you're bringing in supply, and then because the agency charges the school, I mean, I think agencies charge anywhere from like £250 to £300 per day or something. You might know that better than me, but I think I know at least one school that pays about £250 per day for a supply teacher to come in. But obviously then the supply teacher's getting paid £110, say. So naturally the agency is making £130 or £120 on that 1 day supply. And therefore, and if you start stacking up those days, suddenly that schools are in deficit. And and that actually that money is not necessarily being passed on to teachers, not just supply teachers, just teachers in general, because that money then wouldn't go towards the staff who are already in the school. I don't know what the answer to all of that is. I've talked before about like a cap on how much an agency can charge. and how much an agency can make. But people rightly said, no, Tom, market forces dictate. Like, and also, would that be the right message to send if supply teachers are voting with their feet and all that sort of stuff? But I don't know whether you have any thoughts on the whole financial industry around supply.
I find that the supply agencies that pay the lower end for the teachers will be the ones who are maybe charging one of the upper echelons, and they'll say that they are more likely to get you work. But then I found, in this in the time that actually it's the other supply agencies that get me more work than the one that says that they're really good at it and have all the contacts. But yeah, some agencies make a lot of money from the teachers, but that's the way it is, isn't it? That's like within in the NHS with having bank staff.
Yes. I mean, you can say it's the way it is. I mean, for you as a supply teacher, what you've got this experience now of 3 stints of supply. What are your red flags then? Like, when you go into a school, have you developed almost a sixth sense to say, I'm out of here, sort of thing, over time?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm just kind of deposited in a classroom without really seeing anybody, just kind of ushered through and saying you're in this class today, and there's reams of you got like reams of planning, but it doesn't really make sense. That's kind of a red flags. You know, you're gonna have a difficult day, or you have a list of children who you need to watch out for this one, this one, this one, this one. That can kind of turn you off a little bit. But I think the main red flag I've had would be going into a school where the teacher is off on a long-term sick. You don't know why, but you can probably tell it's stress because of the atmosphere in the school, and you are the latest in a long line of supply teachers. That just shows that there's no consistency with that particular class, and you're going to have a difficult time, and you're going to keep having a difficult time because they're used to just getting rid of a teacher and getting another one in.
Yeah, it's sad, really, isn't it, when you think about it that way? It is really bad. What of your and by the way, just to shout out to everyone listening, if anybody else wants to get involved in this conversation, please do. You can just click the little icon in the bottom left, the blue microphone icon. Click that, requesting to speak. It'd be great to hear from any of you, not just if you've been a supply teacher, but also from a leadership perspective. If any of you are leaders or middle leaders or even just teachers in the school, what is your experience of supply teachers coming into the school? I'd be interested in that as well, in terms of how you've integrated them, or how you've seen them in their practice, and how you've tried to help them, maybe, or maybe you've had bad experiences. Maybe you've seen supply teachers left to be stranded, like in your school. Like, whatever your experience is, if you do have an experience to share, always welcome. It'd be great to hear from you. Click the icon bottom left, join myself and Stuart in the conversation, and we'll connect you up. Stuart, I was going to ask you, like, what of your learning experience has been for supply? Has it changed the way you've seen yourself as a teacher? Has it changed the way you operate as a teacher in any way? Has it improved you as a teacher?
Oh, it's difficult that, as I think as a profession, we're not very good at blowing our own trumpets anyway.
No, possibly not.
With coming into schools, going into different schools, you get a chance to see lots of different like classroom displays. You get to see different ways of working, and so I can take different skill sets from different schools, and that's been quite good for me. I've gone into some schools and felt you feel really down at the end of it, thinking that you've let everyone down because one of the children was being really badly behaved, and then you just got to think about yourself and say, actually, no, that's not down to me. That's down to the school. That's down to that child, and then move on with it. so I think in the school that I'm at, so I'm in an alternative provision at the moment, and it took me a while to get used to actually these children are, you know, some of them have gone through a lot of trauma. They are they're acting out because they have got some issues, and it's not because I'm a bad teacher that chair's been thrown across the room. It's just
of course.
they're, you know, that child's in crisis.
Yeah, of course.
So it's just like reassessing and reevaluating what I do coming into a classroom and how I work.
Anna, do you want to contribute something at this point?
Hi Tom. Really absolutely loving the show tonight and really interesting. You were sort of mentioning about from a leadership point of view and obviously experiences of having supply staff in. I'm on leadership and obviously in an alternative provision, and it's such a challenge. I think it's really challenging for new supply staff who are coming in, who particularly I mentioned in the tweet, who haven't really been filled in beforehand from agencies about what alternative provision's like. It might be that they've had not much experience, or that it's not something they've considered, and then it's being sold to them as a small independent school. They're arriving quite shocked and kind of not prepared really, because they've not been informed beforehand, and I think that's a real disservice to teachers and, you know, whether it be supply TAs or teachers, because it's unfair. And I've had quite a lot of experience of that over the last 2 years of agencies, you know, really not being as forthcoming with information about what a school actually is and what it consists of. And I think that's really unfair for supply.
It's unfair on the school as well, isn't it? It's unfair on the school and the children.
And I think logistically, obviously, you'll know yourself from working in AP, it's really difficult because you get some staff who are really experienced with alternative provision and SEMH needs and SEND, and they want to work in AP. And so there's a level of consistency with that. But for children who, you know, do have attachment and trauma and ACEs, sometimes it's multiple agency staff, simply because staff arrive and go, this isn't what I was sold and this is not what I was expecting, and quite rightly have to protect their own mental health and well-being and don't come back. So I think there's something to be said for, you know, and I don't want to label all agencies, but I definitely think there's something to be said for the amount of information that supply staff are given before they arrive in the school, and I think that needs to be better. That's just sort of a personal thing from leadership, really. It's because it's a minefield, I'll be honest with you.
No, thanks for sharing that, Anna. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, my sort of experience, I did supply once in an AP many years ago. This would have been in 2015-16, and I did about maybe 3 weeks in there, I think it was, and I was working mainly one-to-one with different students, and one of them is one of my favorite stories. I always tell it. Is he was sort of, well, not allowed, but if he decided that he wanted to leave, you know, it was sort of let him leave. So, you know, he used to walk out, and when he walked out, I remember they said to me, well, you've got to sort of follow him. You can't just let him go. So I took that quite literally. I was like, well, I have to follow him. I can't just let him go wherever. So I ended up, this lad, he walked out. He wasn't running. He just walked out. And they were like, yeah, just see, sort of, you know, just check he doesn't go off anywhere. Anyway, he did go off somewhere. So he ended up sort of walking 100 meters ahead of me for like a good couple of minutes. And then I was like, well, what should I do? Should I carry on following this person, or should I just go back to the center, or sort of whatever? Anyway, next thing, I was like, damn, because he then, I realized we'd walked around the side of this building, and then suddenly he just dives down this slope. He just charges down this slope, and there's no way for me to get down it. So I'm stranded at the top of this hill. He's on a different road. It was brilliant, in the middle of like Skelmersdale somewhere, and I was like, oh my god, what am I doing with my life? But it was quite funny. And then I just walked with my tail between the legs back to the AP, and that is my story. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna create my own sound effects, because neither of you given me anything back.
I was well done.
Thank you
But
very
Tom,
much.
don't you feel like that's a little bit in itself is like the lack of communication is really frustrating if you're not if you don't have time to learn about the pupils, if there's not kind of like not a flow but necessarily like a profile so you can learn the needs and triggers and things, if that's not provided when you first go into whether it's AP or not, I think any supply staff need to be given a chance to kind of like have a thorough kind of briefing before they go into the classroom and be given that opportunity to kind of get to grip with things before they go in. And I know the whole point of supply is obviously to hit the ground running to some extent because they're covering a class, but we need to get better at sharing that information and strategies and stuff so that supply feel confident in working in schools. And obviously, Stuart, you've got more experience of me than working in supply because it's not something I've done, but working in AP as well. I hope that do you feel like we need supply staff need more information? I feel like
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's definitely when I started, I didn't really know what to expect. I knew it was an AP. I'd looked up the school on the internet, just had a look what kind of things, where it was and what kind of things it was. And I got there and I was a little bit shocked at the beginning, but I've loved it since. I've just I've loved working with these children. I've loved the building relationships because I think that's the crux of working in AP is being able to build the relationships with those children. But it did take time for me to get used to what I needed to do, what was expected, and what I do in different situations.
I just feel like information needs to be shared more also from a leadership point of view so that you
Yeah.
have got staff who are wanting to come and wanting to come back, because it's an absolute logistical nightmare to try and schedule things in and run things when it's people are coming and saying this isn't what I expected, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not negative, but they're not being sold what it is.
Yeah, I think I was very lucky in that the classes that I went into had some absolutely fantastic TAs in the class who kind of they took me under their wing and just explained what happens in the class rather than going through an entire ream of paper. Just said, okay, this one you need to try this strategy with. We will try this strategy with this other child, and it was just very useful having people on the ground who could help through those first few days.
That's good.
Well, I mean, that's brilliant. Anna, thanks so much for calling in. It's really good to hear that experience. Stuart, I just wanted to ask you before we sort of, I've got a couple of questions left that I wanted to ask you about. Yeah. What would your advice be to somebody who is doing supply or is going to be doing supply?
I would say sign up with more than one agency for a start. Get to know the schools that you're going to be visiting and you're going to be working in, and just remember that you're actually in control of whether or not you want to go into that school or not. You are perfectly entitled just to say, actually, no, I don't fancy it today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. Thinking back now, that stint of supply I did, we're going back 8 years or however long it was, 9 years now. I think now I would have turned around and gone, I'll see you later, sort of thing, And actually, looking back, I should have done that, but not knowing that you really can do that, and you're well within your rights to do that, and actually, it's good for you to do that. It can be a real problem because you end up sort of thinking, well, I better do this or I have to do this. Do you know what I mean? And
yeah,
thinking, I don't want to let them down, but ultimately, you are a freelance teacher ultimately, so do what's best for you. Do you take any work home or not? Like when you do these contracts, or are you very much, I'm going in there, I'll do the job, and then I'm off?
At the moment, I'll take a little bit of work home, so just so I'm prepared for the next day, because I'm working 5 days a week at the moment in the
Right.
same class. So I'm just
Right.
making sure I'm keeping on top of things. But normally I just in other supply things, I just make sure I've marked everything and I go home.
Yeah.
Even if I'm working there for a few days in a row, I would make sure I mark and I go home. I'd spend some time with my family, which is something I couldn't really do when I was working full time.
Well, this is the thing that people, I think, underestimate is some people choose to be supply teachers. I think, it is often a lifestyle choice. I am going to be a supply teacher. Now, listen, most teachers who are qualified teachers, who are in any way experienced teachers, a lot of them don't necessarily want to be supply teachers, but they want the lifestyle of a supply teacher. And that's where our profession has a problem, because any teacher, if they really want to, should be able to achieve the lifestyle of a supply teacher in a school as a permanent member of staff, if that's what they want. That's my opinion. Sure, shoot me down for it. That's absolutely fine. But I think that's one of our fundamental problems, is that we expect too much from your full-time classroom teacher. And I use that phrase carefully, because I'm saying particularly those who have the fullest of timetables, to say they need that option, if you like, to say, you know what, I'm gonna almost teach like a supply teacher for the next few weeks. I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna teach my lessons, and then I'm gonna go home, and I'm just gonna get my head down and bomb through. Now, actually, I think that a lot of schools do, will sort of, if you like, allow for that. But I think there's other schools that are like, no, we have these non-negotiables. We have all these things we expect you to do. And then those teachers go, well, they may burn out in the end. They may go, do you know what? I'm not capable of keeping up with all this. I'm out. And then when they're out, they will then start doing supply, and they'll realize, I'm not really utilizing my talents here as a teacher. It's more about crowd control. It's more about just keeping things ticking over. But actually, it's so much easier than working full time in a school. Now, isn't that a problem? Isn't that a massive problem, that people would prefer to be? And it's not about money, right? It's not about the money. It's not about saying, well, I'm making more because I'm on supply. It's not going to be about. It's not about that. This is about people saying, I'm making a lifestyle choice to be on supply. And that's where we're at, in my opinion, as a profession, where people are saying, I'd rather just work on an ad hoc basis as a crowd control manager with all my experience and qualifications, because it's just that little bit easier for me, because I don't need to worry. If you're not a permanent member of staff, you don't have to worry about the future as much. You don't have to worry about.
There's also a thing with the with your permanent members of staff, where it's almost like peer pressure to stay late. No one wants to be the first one to leave.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Does that present it? Does that sort of idea of having to keep up with the Joneses a little bit when you're permanent in some schools, not in all schools, but in a definite number of schools, there is that idea, I need to keep up with everybody else by doing what everybody else is doing. And that it's just tiring. And for me, I left a school that nearly killed me in terms of workload. Like, I was burnt out to hell by the end of and I quit halfway through an academic year in that particular school. And after that, I did supply, and I was like, you know what? For all the F-offs and the sort of, the times where you're like, oh, bloody hell, actually leaving at 3:00 and 3:30 and not having to worry about anything until the next day, really, was an incredibly liberating experience for me. It was actually one where hang on a minute, and actually going, I'm not necessarily enjoying this as much as building a relationship with a class, and the really best things about teaching. I wasn't getting that out of it, but what I was getting out of it was a sense of being a human being again, and actually being able to go, this is a job. I'm turning up to work, and then I am going home, and nobody is sort of demanding too much from me as a human being. And but in some ways that's wrong, Nobody should have to have that mentality, but that is the reality across the profession for too many teachers, in my opinion. That sort of way of having to think.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's definitely is there's definite different style as a supply teacher than when I was working full time. Yeah, when I was working full time, I wasn't getting home until gone 6 most
Yeah.
nights. Now I'm coming home by about 4 at the latest, and I get to spend time with my daughter. I actually have hobbies now, which is great.
Yeah, this is what I mean. I mean, don't get me wrong. This is why we've got a problem, because you now, Stuart, you're working supply now. You should be, in an ideal world, if the profession was at a really strong point, you should now be going, blooming heck, I'm hating this, and I want to get back permanent into a school. Like, do you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like that, it should be better to work in a school and be a supply teacher by times 5, shouldn't it?
it should be. It should be. And I say the advantages to working full time at the moment would be the being able to having your own class, making a
Yeah,
relationship with that class, and the pay is better working full time than it is supply. Even if I'm working every day as supply, I'm not earning what I was as a upper pay scale 2 teacher working full time.
yeah. Well, you're missing out on the pension. You're missing out on.
Yeah,
There's loads of stuff that you're missing out on. All the sort of perks of being a full time member of staff, being embedded in the school, and you're missing out on friendships maybe with other colleagues. You're missing out on you know those really special moments once you've bonded with a class and you can really get to know them and you really experiencing you're right in it. You're missing out on a lot of that, and that's sad. But equally, as I said, the bigger consideration is you've now got hobbies.
yeah,
You can actually see people and not feel guilt about going out, or not even just going out, just sitting around in your house watching TV on a Tuesday night and not have to feel stressed or guilty about that.
yeah. Just having a weekend and spending the weekend doing what I want.
I mean, Stuart, I hope you're not going to charge me for this therapy session that I'm having with you. But it is
Well,
helping me. And I hope you've got like a virtual sofa there that I can sit on next time we do
I
this.
I do have a virtual sofa. Yeah,
Because I'm bringing back all my memories of when really what I'm referring to here is my experience sort of 8-9 years ago, and the way I felt then about things, and like how that panned out for me at the time, and just that sense of liberation. It should never feel like that. I can't really stress that enough. By the way, if anybody's got anything to share on this, we're going to wrap up sort of, if not pretty soonish, but if anybody in the last sort of 10 minutes now wants to sort of call in, share maybe your experience of any supply you've done, or maybe just an experience in general of what we're talking about, like the fact that my sort of provocation is supply should never be better than being a member of staff in a school on a contract. It should never be better than that, but in many cases teachers are choosing to do that because it is better. We've got friend of the show Paul calling in, hopefully to offer more therapy to Tom, about Paul, what is your take
Hi,
on
mate.
this?
I've been at all sides of this sort of situation. Long time, permanent, supply, just going into schools one day here and there, sort of supply contract till from Christmas to summer, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
And the first thing that hits me really is the attitude that you're given. I went from a permanent, and I left a permanent one to actually take a 1-year contract, just because I needed to move away from the school I was in. And there was a situation where actually in the time that I got the 1-year contract to actually starting in September, the head teacher changed. And the new head teacher who came in, her attitude towards supply staff, where there were 3 of us on the staff, was very, very different to the permanent staff that were there. it was almost like, you are not going to be here very long. You can come in, do your work, results and things like that. Just come in, do your stuff, and then go home, because next year you're not going to be here. And that kind of then spiraled on to the rest of the staff. So there's 3 of us, often having our dinner separate and things like this, and just treat it differently. So some of my experience has been, be sort of prepared to be a sort of second-class citizen until you've earned rights, really.
Yeah.
That's definitely
no, absolutely. I mean, I talked very early on, Paul, before you arrived in, about this idea that I believe, and this is my opinion, there is a bit of sort of snobbery in the teaching profession in various different ways. But one of the ways that is expressed is definitely towards supply teachers. And I actually said earlier on that I've been guilty of that in the past, like slipping into a mentality of, I've never been rude or anything like that. Of course not. Like I'd never do that. Like, but you know, I have slipped into that mentality of, oh, it's a supply teacher, right? And not being as supportive or helpful or like of how I normally would be. And, you know, I'll never do that again. But, you know, in my mid-20s, early 20s, once I'd been in a school for a couple of years, I got established, and that was the first school I'd worked in since training. You know, I did maybe get into that mentality, and I shouldn't have. But that is something we do. I think we need to guard against that in the profession, and like, yeah, not do it basically.
Yeah, I think there's definitely tendency to do it. I've probably been guilty of it myself in the past. It's just because we know that sometimes there are teachers out there who are supplied because they haven't been able. It's not that they didn't want to be, you know, employed by a school for a long period of time. They maybe are just, you know, their skill set is limited to a particular number of things. So there have been some supply teachers who have come in the past, and you thought, yeah, maybe this class isn't going to be good for you to sort of come back to. But the fact that sometimes you are not given a chance before you sort of walk through the door can be quite hard, to be fair. In the same breath, if you're a half decent teacher and you are at school for a few times, and they like you, then they can be very willing to keep you on and fill a gap. But that's generally what you will do. You'll fill the gaps that are needed until, again, you've earned your stripes properly.
Well, it's been an amazing chat. Huge thanks to John Catt for supporting the show tonight. If you want to sort of check out the John Catt offer, you can do so in the pinned tweet in this space, or you can visit them at johncattbookshop.com. You can get 20% off your order at John Catt by using the code JCTTR2324. It's been fabulous to talk to my guest this evening. If you missed anything that we've done this evening, as soon as we finish, you can just click play on this link and listen back to everything from the beginning if you want to do that. We had Beth on at the beginning. It was really good hearing from her about her experiences of supply in London. She taught in 15 schools, and she shared her experiences working there, some of them very, very difficult. So if you want to listen back to that, this will also be available as a podcast to listen back to, so you can do that too. So yeah, just follow us on wherever you get your podcasts from, Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you do that. Click follow, click subscribe, and then this one will pop up on there in the next couple of days, undoubtedly. A massive thanks to everyone who has listened live, as always, particularly everybody who has stayed the duration of most of the show this evening. Always appreciated, and I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. Also reflecting back on some of my own experiences of supply, some of which were not easy, like the time I ended up in the pub car park, stranded. You missed that as well, Paul, but it was a good story, for another time. But anyway, it was great, and I'll be back next Monday evening, same time, 7:30. So until then, take care and have a good week.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR 2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.